So throughout the day, we have listened to a policy discussion, heard from people on the front lines of housing, people experiencing homelessness, and examined the issues facing our industry from both the national and local levels. In our final panel of the day, moderator Kirk Goodrich, president of Monadnock Development, will lead a discussion centered in innovative housing solutions that are being piloted today and ideas for where we can make immediate changes for the greatest impact on our housing supply. Run the show, Kurt. Thank you.
How's everybody doing? I got my hard sole shoes on and a tie. Y'all in trouble. Or as the Trini say, look trouble. Samantha, I thought we agreed to have some walk-up music for myself and the panelists.
Cue the music.
Just like, they do when you're walking from the batter's circle to the plate. Good question. I would go with house music. You see what I did there? House music. No, Everybody by Black Box. Ow. You asked, I didn't ask. Dan is like, could you get on with the show? This is part of the program. I don't see this part in the book. It's the last panel. Stay awake. That was, by the way, that was fabulous. Brian and Danny, can we give them another hand? Incredible. So really excited today because we have an outstanding group of folks who really have thought out of the box in terms of expanding housing solutions. And what I'd like to do, so I'm Kirk Goodrich. I'm president of Monadnock Development, good friend of Help USA, and co-host of the Housing Problem podcast. And what I'd like to do is have each of you introduce yourselves and give 1 minute on kind of what your area of research focus practice is, if you would do that. Nadine, would you start?
Can you hear me? I'm short, so it's always hard with a mic. So I'm Nadine. I'm a principal at Community Solutions. We're a national nonprofit organization. I started my work, though, in New York City, developing permanent supportive housing, using low-income housing tax credits. I started my career with an organization called Common Ground, which is now Breaking Ground. Yeah, great organization.
Breaking Ground in the house?
Yeah, is anyone from Breaking?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
Yay! And over the last, I'd say, 3 years at Community Solutions, we started to think about other ways to develop affordable housing. For a lot of the reasons that we actually heard on the panel previous, and because there are a lot of wonderful organizations using low-income housing tax credits and developing that, and the more different kinds of housing topologies in a community, the better. That's meeting the needs of the individuals who are experiencing homelessness. So we lifted up a social impact fund where we now are purchasing naturally occurring affordable housing with the intention of, as people move out of the units naturally, people are then connected to that housing unit from the homeless response system, up to 50%. And the other 50% will maintain affordability for workforce housing. We remove all barriers to entry into the housing. So issues with your credit score, other kinds of issues that might prevent you from getting housing are removed. And that's probably more than 1 minute.
That's okay.
So, I'll give it over to Mark.
Yeah, Mark.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Norman. I'm the Associate Dean, Chair, and Professor at NYU's Scheck Institute of Real Estate. I got my start in Los Angeles at Skid Row Housing Trust doing affordable supportive housing, then came to New York to work at LISC, National Equity Fund, and have done sort of affordable and mixed income housing. I pivoted a little bit because I certainly didn't solve the housing crisis and thought more about economic development and wealth building Currently working with cities on some of those issues, which I think we'll get to a little bit later.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. Andy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Andy Phillips, founder and managing partner at Make Home Capital. We are an impact private credit fund, and what we do is provide flexible loans to help scale high-impact health, education, and human service programs. So I have spent my career, I started off working in organizations that were providing shelter to families, and this goes back to the 80s. I ran one of the earliest transitional housing programs, and early in my career also, my day-to-day job was helping primarily women who'd found their way into the shelter system find permanent, affordable housing. And so that goes back to the mid-'80s that I've been in and around these issues. Currently at Make Home, what we've done is pulled together investment capital from folks who want to invest their dollars in a way that not just provides a financial return, but also drives tangible social impact. And I'm going to have a chance to talk about a couple investments we've made that we think are playing a part in addressing this vast, vast challenge that we collectively face.
Thanks, Andy.
So it's great to be here.
Thank you. So one of the things that's been frustrating to me, having been in affordable housing for more than 30 years now, is how limited we've been in our thinking about solutions. And after almost 40 years, the low-income housing tax credit is still the principal financial vehicle for creating affordable housing, and we have other forms of credits that are companion, historic tax credits and brownfields credits and state credits. But what's terrific about the panel today is we got folks who are really thinking outside the box. And so Nadine, I want to come back to you and have you take a little bit deeper dive on the work you've led at Community Solutions in terms of raising capital and being really entrepreneurial, not only in markets we're familiar with, but in many other markets. So if you would just share some of what you've done, that'd be terrific.
Absolutely. So the Social Impact Fund is basically investors are investing into our fund with the intention that they get a social return on their investment. They also do receive a modest return on their investment after 10 years. What it does is two things. It maintains affordability and perpetuity in a community. It allows us to act nimbly and quickly so that we could actually purchase affordable housing in communities much faster than we could when we developed low-income housing tax credits. On average, it takes about 5 years. They're very expensive. There's a lot of fees associated with low-income housing tax credits. And there are organizations doing that. And so we just looked at another way to, once again, bring more housing quickly into a community. I want to say that the work is braided very much. It's looking at so if we're going to say, can we build ourselves out of this problem? The quick answer is no, we can't. But can we resolve this problem? The quick answer is yes, we can. We have to look at our policies, we have to look at our regulations, and we have to see how is our housing actually connected to the homeless response system. We have two different systems that work kind of in parallel, but not necessarily connected. There's the housing system and there's the homeless response system. And we need to very much connect and bridge those two things. And I think what we're trying to do with purchasing of these units in communities is to understand who's actively homeless in a community by name, what are their needs, and how do we connect them to housing that exists in communities. There's a lot of access issues. Yes, we need much more affordable housing, and I think some of the earlier panels were talking about that we need more affordable housing, 100%. But how do we also utilize the housing that does exist and make sure that those people that are most in need of housing are accessing those units? So we're doing this work in Baltimore, Atlanta, Nashville, Charlotte, San Diego, and Phoenix. But that's where we've actually purchased buildings. But our work at Community Solutions is in 140 communities across the country, where we're working with communities to develop systems so that they can truly understand who's actively homeless, not just based on like the HUD definition, but who's actively homeless, meeting people where they are, engaging with people who are experiencing homelessness and having them connected to the solutions. And I think it's bridging all of those populations and systems to resolve this.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Nadine. So Mark, I wanted you to talk to folks about your work, because it's very different from Nadine's and I think Andy's, but really focused engagement in with a couple of cities to kind of advance what they're trying to do. Could you talk to us about that?
Sure. I mean, I think it is a little bit similar to Nadine, and I think it goes to your point about the, sort of the tax credit program being almost the only solution
Played out.
we think about.
Just say play it out. That's a joke.
Because, I mean, having been started in the late 90s, I now have projects I worked on that are exiting affordability and have to be recapitalized or going market.
Right.
Right, so that's a inherent issue with, you know, with some of those things. I mean, 30 years is a long time, but then all of a sudden it isn't, right? Because the things are now not going to be affordable, or they're going to sort of pivot in a way where residents now are vulnerable again. So just a couple of examples in Ann Arbor, they were writing sort of RFPs one by one for developers to come in and develop. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But what we did, what we're doing now actually, is we looked at 12 city-owned sites. We looked at each site and what that site could do, and underwrote it 4 to 5 different ways. So underwrite it as a ground lease, underwrite it as a sale, underwrite it as a limited equity co-op, underwrite it with no tax credits and just bonds issued by the city, and see how those work in terms of affordability, in terms of sort of long-term stability, in terms of getting out of housing crisis that most cities are facing. And when we did that, then we went out to the development community, like, would you actually respond to this RFP? And in some cases, the answer was no. And so then the question was, well, should the city agency, which is also the housing authority, be the developer? Ultimately, 6 sites were chosen. We wrote the RFPs. But before we wrote the RFPs, we took it through the approval process. So what did that do? One, it took a lot of risk away from the developer, but it also meant that we could demand from the developer a lower fee. It also got it built faster. So the first development that's 100% affordable and supportive is now topping out. That RFP was issued 13 months ago, right, which is lightning speed.
Right.
And in other cases, it will probably be a land sale because the land is so valuable, and all of that money goes into the Affordable Housing Fund. So I think thinking about not individual RFPs, but a kind of a city strategy in a way that you can underwrite deals. The other thing is, just real quick, some of those deals wouldn't have worked for tax credits because they were too close to a train track, or, you know, or they were going to be chasing points, and it was going to Nadine's point, add costs to the development. In some cases, 30 to 40%, because of various things, and also doing things that we might not be able to do otherwise in the tax credit program, like SROs or rooming houses, congregate care, and other things. So it was interesting to sort of really look at not just the tax credits, but different ways to underwrite those deals to get the ultimate solution to sort of like, how do we get more housing faster?
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mark. And Andy, could you give us an overview of your work?
Sure. As I said, we're an investment firm, and what we do is we partner with nonprofits and sometimes for-profits that have shown that they can really make an impact on economic mobility writ large, and really helping folks either retain or progress along a path of economic mobility. What I want to talk about today is a project here in New York with Help USA and Riseboro and Enterprise Community Partners and Trinity Church Wall Street.
I think
feel like
you all
everybody's in
here,
the
right?
house.
Everybody mentioned
Like
this
that
here?
may be the whole room. Fantastic. Maybe I just should stop talking. But so I think this is a great way to end the day, because I caught part of the last panel, which I think was hard to listen to, right? It probably wasn't news to most of us, but it also was, I think, at least for me, hard to listen to. And what I'm excited about this panel, and also some of the work that I know Kirk is doing, is that we are also in a moment, yes, where the challenge is expanding and somewhat overwhelming, but where there are some new and creative solutions. So when we think about the solution right now, one of them that we're supporting, it's not about increasing supply. What it's about is the people who live in affordable housing and tackling the problem in a way that keeps them from becoming homeless. What we all know is that in the aftermath, particularly of COVID, folks got into tremendous arrears to a place that was near impossible to get out of. What we know is that is really bad for the family, and I can't imagine living with that sort of knife at the back of your neck as a mom. What we also know is it was really bad for the landlords, right? Because they have to pay their mortgage on that property. They need to continue to operate that property. We also know it's bad for the city, because the end of the story for very large arrears is eviction, which costs the landlord money because they're paying the lawyer, costs the city money because they're paying for the person's lawyer, which is a good thing. And it also costs the city because more than likely that person's going to end up in emergency shelter. And I think that was some of the crazy math, I would say, that we heard about in the last panel. And most importantly, it's devastating for a family. The disruption for families and kids is unimaginable. So in about 2022, I was having dinner with a good friend, Ron Molis from L&M Development Partners, who folks here probably know. And he was telling me about a pilot project that he did with Riseboro around funding them to go in and go to those tenants who were in arrears and actually help them get access to these short-term benefits, like one-shot deals that they could take advantage of, help them get their voucher back in good standing, which we know happens more than anybody would like it to happen. And then importantly, also focus on long-term financial coaching. What we then began to work on with that larger group of partners, it was fantastic. They did a pilot project, it really worked, was how can we scale it? And that's where we came into it. And so what we do is we provided a loan that benefits both Riseboro and Help USA to hire those workers to go out and do that work. The landlords are at the table, and what's really key about their role is it's twofold. One is they actually know everybody who's in arrears. They know people who are really far gone, people who are maybe less far gone. That information is key to identifying who needs help. So they refer their tenants. What they then do is they have agreed that once the workers go out, help folks get back into good standing, that they'll pay on a fee-for-service basis for actually helping that tenant. So rather than paying the lawyers, what they're doing is paying to get folks out of arrears and back in good standing. This project started a little over a year ago. Our target is to serve 2,000 families and individuals. We already have 60 plus and probably more since I got my data, success stories where on average folks have had paid off around $10,000 in arrears. So thank you. Super exciting. What we're also very excited about is that this machine is running and operating with two such fabulous partners on the ground. And interestingly, we're now getting calls from other landlords. And those other landlords are coming to us and saying, oh, we would like to be part of this project. And so it's an exciting one. And again, I think we're excited about the results to date. We're optimistic about where we're going to get to. This is one piece of a very big puzzle, but we're very proud to be part of it.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy. So when we were preparing for this, I thought I would take a moment and add to the panel discussion by talking a little bit about modular construction, because it's something that people just generally fall in love with. And while I don't have specific background in it, many of you may know that the company I am a partner in was founded by a guy named Nick Lembo, who founded Monadnock Construction as well 50 years ago, but and a few other companies. But the one I want to talk about is Capsis, which is a modular company he founded, I believe, in the early 90s and operated for 20 years. And the reason it's meaningful is there is, as I sort of participate in panels like this and go to meetings and sessions with people who are thought leaders, inevitably there's a lengthy conversation or somebody touting modular construction. And Nick is, as an undergraduate architecture student at Cornell in the early 70s, dreamed about not only being a contractor, but opening a modular factory. In the early 90s, he was approached by leadership and pastors of East Brooklyn congregations and they had a meeting in the Lindenwood Diner out in East New York, and they asked him if he would agree to be a builder in Nehemiah. The previous builder had some, and the original builder had some challenges because many of you who may be familiar with Nehemiah understand that it was during the 80s in East New York and Brownsville. You had large swaths of open land. You're building homes. It's really hard to secure the site. There's theft. They had issues with the quality of construction as well as security. And so Nick thought it was the perfect opportunity for a modular construction solution, and agreed in that meeting without having anything put together to do 700 homes modular. He then left the meeting, went to the Navy Yard, and probably a few places before that, found the space. He designed the factory, he leased the space, designed the factory, created the drawings for the prototype, hired staff, trained them, put the money up and the time to get the factory and the license with the state and the city, signed contracts with labor, and really single-handedly financed and set this up. And that's important because those of you familiar with the industry, there have been really large, well-capitalized companies that have failed, and he laughs because he literally did it single-handedly, and they weren't wood frame modules, they were steel and concrete. And so he did far beyond 700 homes. I think the company over a 20-year period did over 3 million square feet modular, and but they're lessons, right? I had him, he keeps up with the publications, and here's all the discussion about it. And I had him write 6 pages, single-spaced on this, and shared it with a few folks. But there's some big picture takeaways. One, it's not a magic bullet. In fact, our conventional construction company, in many ways, building the way we build at Monadnock, typically can outperform what we did with Capsis. I think the second thing is the modules that he fabricated and did typically worked better for a building where there was a lot of replication and smaller units. So senior housing, supportive housing. We did a project that was a 12-story building in Bushwick in the supportive housing area with concern for independent living. So the prototype, hotel rooms, senior housing, supportive housing, really works best, and single-family homes as well when a module roughly equals a unit or a floor. Anything beyond that, it gets more complicated because you get efficiency by replicating the same thing over and over again. Where you make money is not the fact that it's cheaper than stick-built. In terms of the cost of materials and labor, where you make money is that while you are doing foundation work, simultaneously you're fabricating the superstructure in a factory. And so theoretically, what you're doing is picking up a lot of time. And when interest rates are high, the savings are greater. And so the combination of doing the right kind of product and creating the superstructure of the building or the homes in a factory while you're doing the foundation is really what the advantage is. And so on the last real deal we did with Capsis, and incidentally, he closed the factory because our lease ran out in the Navy Yard, and the folks in the Navy Yard at that time really wanted to expand Steiner Studios and didn't want to renew his lease, and he couldn't find another space, and so we closed the business, or he did, after 20 years. But the last building we did was on my micro building on 27th Street near Bellevue Hospital, and we have a time lapse of that online, which was spectacular. But we had foundation issues there we didn't expect to have, and normally that would delay everything. But the reality is on that project, although we had significant foundation delays, the only thing that happened is that we were able to do more modules during the delay. And so it was about storing the modules, and as soon as we got the foundation done, we were able to catch up and put the building together. So anyway, that's an overview. I probably used more than 5 minutes, but I wanted to talk about it because generally it's a topic that people want to know a little bit about. Though I want to pivot back to this conversation though, because I think the common thread, I think specifically with Nadine and Andy's is the ability to raise private capital for social purpose. And the thing about raising money, whether you're a developer finding money for your deal or you're raising some sort of fund, is people like to give money to folks they've given to before. And that generally works for people who are in that world, but for others, not so good. And you could be really, really good at what you do. If they're not used to giving you money in the capital world, you don't get it. It's a real high threshold. So this is not on the list, but to that point, like part of what I'm excited about is the ability to capture private equity and resources for public good and purpose. So I want to do 3 lightning questions, and Mark, you should feel free to answer this one too. If you guys could talk a minute about your ability or methodology to be able to access significant amounts of private money for good social purpose.
So I personally was not the person going out and getting the funds for the
Well,
fund.
forget it then.
Yeah, but I could talk a little bit about
Next.
it. Yeah.
All right, I'll jump in.
Yeah. So,
I'm joking.
yeah. I'll go really quickly though. So I work for Community Solutions. A few years back, we were fortunate to receive the 100 and Change Award from the MacArthur Foundation, which was huge. So 10 million of that grant went to seed the fund. That's a huge, a huge privilege that we had, because investors are more interested in investing not first. So we had that as a foundation.
Right.
We then additionally went to healthcare systems and asked healthcare systems to invest in the fund, because they would absolutely be, and I think we heard some of that earlier, would be interested in investing if it was also going to support their bottom line. And so we went to the healthcare systems as well. And then it was a little bit easier to get private investors to then come in. People or investments receive about 6 to 7% of a return on their investment after 10 years. After the 10-year mark, I do want to say this because I didn't say it after, our organization, or even better, a nonprofit in the municipality, will then be able to own the building from the investors, with the condition that that building will maintain affordability in perpetuity. So it is unlike a LIHTC deal where it's recapitalized, or needs to be recapitalized. That would be part of. And the idea is that during those 10 years, the work that we are doing and supporting the people that are actually doing the work on the ground in those communities, they have lifted up a nonprofit that could then take ownership of a property in 10 years' time.
Excellent. Mark, you want to jump in?
I think sometimes private equity can be a swear word.
Right.
But it also is just equity that's not from a public entity, and so I think we all use it.
Right.
And, to the extent that we're invested in 401ks, pensions, or whatever else, we're also in it, and it can be for good. So I just wanted to say that.
Absolutely.
But also, I'm working on a project in Portland, Oregon, a historically African-American community. And sometimes I think when you have a compelling story and a value proposition, that also is something that can bring capital. So in this particular development, it was a district plan, right? The highway, urban renewal, wrecked the neighborhood. So how do you build it back, and how do you make sure that the African-American community is supported and benefits from that? So one was these wealth building stories. So the notion from the city was 20-story towers, lots of affordability. But that means steel construction, that means nobody in the neighborhood or African-American contractors are going to work on it because they're at the 4 to 8 unit scale or the small apartment building. So the first phase was going to be tied to the African-American supply chain. And we did the wealth building stories to say somebody now, right, in a training program in 10 years, right, and as we scale up, they scale up with the scale of the buildings. And Phil Knight, the owner of the Trailblazers and Nike, stepped up with a $400 million fund.
Wow.
That can be leveraged to acquire property and to also sort of leverage, other dollars. And so I think the story was compelling, and it's not grants, but it was demonstrated that a return probably around the same amount, like in the 6 to 7% range, was feasible.
That's fantastic. Andy?
Sure. So I am the person who raises the money for our fund. Writ large, it's a slog, but anybody in this room who raises money knows that. Joking aside, I think what I would add to what folks have said, it is telling the story. It's telling the story of why the investment matters, but it is also telling a story that the economics will work, right? That you're going to make investments that drive an impact and then will also provide a return. What I will say to you is our investors are a mix of ultra high net worth families, not Phil Knight, but I would love an intro.
Wow.
And as well as some foundations, some healthcare institutions. And what I would say is no matter how many zeros there are after someone's net worth, if it's an investment, they want to understand what the fundamental economics are and feel comfortable that you are the right person to then manage it.
Right.
For me personally, I was fortunate after spending years working in communities to spend 6 years at Goldman Sachs, where I was able to raise a fund at Goldman, which was sort of a wonderful place to start because I brought with me institutional credibility. I then had the good fortune to leave Goldman Sachs and be able to take some of that institutional credibility with me without some of the burden of coming from Goldman Sachs. But it's the story, and it's the why the financing matters and why that's the right way to do it. And we often talk about, we're not replacing philanthropy, we're just helping philanthropy go further, and we're also tapping into government and other funding streams and helping it work better together.
Yeah, that's a great presentation of it, Andy. So what I want to do is I'm going to combine two questions together and just go down line one. So I think two of the bigger challenges in the economic environment we're in, cost escalating, and people not getting paid a lot, and the destabilization that you see in communities and families is one, as a building owner, how to keep the buildings functioning and viable to house people. And in New York, that's increasingly challenging. I have a lot of my colleagues who are looking to sell affordable buildings and want to be in other markets. The second is helping families who are stably housed remain so, and how do we deliver people the right level of service. And so I want to combine those and just have each of you give thoughts. It's on the building viability and the stability of families who live in these buildings, and give your thoughts on that. And then after that, we'll open it up to questions from you all. So, yeah, absolutely, Nadine.
Okay. Sort of picking up on what Andy was talking about. So in our buildings, we've developed this property management ethos called Property Management Plus. Honestly, it's just really good property management, but really what it does is center the tenant's experience and the tenant's issues so that property management is supporting tenants to remain stably housed. And so what does that look like on the day-to-day? It could be that a tenant is in arrears, and so, okay, rather than like just give them notification, which they do need to understand that they are responsible for their rental payment, it is, okay, you missed your rent check this month. How are we gonna get you onto a path where you are now gonna be able to pay your back rent, so that it never escalates to a point where they're never going to be able to come from under that. And that really does start at lease signing. It means having a case manager, if a person is in need of a case manager, present at lease signing, making sure that the tenant understands their roles and responsibilities of tenancy, making sure that the property manager understands clearly their roles and responsibilities of centering the tenant experience as part of their job, and the role of the case manager, that they need to show up, and they need to show up in a way that is purposeful to maintain that housing stability. And all of those, like the property managers and case managers, we know there's real capacity issues. So then from our perspective, what can we do to support case managers who are doing very, very difficult work with very, very large caseloads? What do they need to support so that they can show up to support their clients? And then property managers, how do we get them to understand and kind of reach across that aisle between the property management company and the case manager, and continuing to set the tenant and the tenant's experience, or the client and the client's experience, kind of above whatever system or narrative that they might have. So that's part of the way that we do that work.
Thank you. Mark?
I mean, I might just point back to 27th Street that you all did. There's so many ways we took certain kinds of affordable off the table, and that project, for example, right, would have been...
You hated it?
No, I did. I loved it. But it would have been illegal under
I didn't know where you were going with that. That's why.
I mean, it was an experiment in
Right.
small units, which New York City stopped allowing. And like when you think about all the ways housing was affordable,
Right,
and we took it off the table.
right.
Minimum unit sizes, you know, even like unaccompanied or sort of unaffiliated adults not being able to live together.
Right.
Those were value judgments that took affordability off the table. So it's nice to see finally that people are coming around to figuring out ways to change it, whether it's like a demonstration project like you did, or modular manufactured housing, prefab. I think City of Yes is a good start also. You know, getting additional FAR for affordability. So we'll see how that works out. But I've been looking across the country at the ways you can do that, and then figuring out how that produces more housing.
I loved hearing Nadine talk about the way you guys do property management.
Fantastic.
Clearly, you are an outlier. Because I think what we see happening in real life, and I've seen this over time, is that the first thing to go is services. Right? That's always, oh, we thought we were going to be able to do that, but interest rates went up. Cost of building went up, cost of operations went up. And so that's really, I think, in many cases, the first thing to go, which, as my late mother used to say, is really cutting off your nose to spite your face, right? Because that is going to cost you in the long run. Some of what the projects we've done in other places to solve for that and to solve for folks who need services is to look in other places, not necessarily the usual suspects, right? So when you're thinking about building and operating housing, you're focused on the housing department. But in real life, if you're talking about housing people who are chronically homeless or formerly street homeless, actually the health department absorbs a lot of costs, and hospitals absorb a lot of costs associated with those folks. Or the Department of Corrections absorbs a lot of folks. And the question is, are there creative ways, and we're seeing them in different places. We're doing a project right now in Rhode Island where the sort of takeout funding for a project providing permanent supportive housing is not the housing department, it's the health department and the corrections department. And so it is in effect sort of saying, let's make this pie bigger. Let's find the people who have aligned economic interest. It's the same thing of the eviction prevention program. We're not, while we do believe landlords should do the right thing, what I would also say is they may do the right thing as a one-off using philanthropy. But if you want it to scale and sustain over time, it has to sort of align with their business interests and goals, and the same thing with the different places in government.
That's great.
So that's some of how we try and think about it.
So thank you all for that. So what we're going to do now is open it up for questions. Where's Samantha? So we're going to go to 3. We're going to go to 3. So
Everybody's tired.
Hi, how are you? I just have a couple of questions that I'm just curious about. You were
one
talking.
question.
Two.
We don't play that.
I'll ask them as a run-on sentence, and then you'll have to decide. So I was curious when you were talking about the modular building, if there's any reality in 3D printing being used for modular housing, if that makes any sense.
So I hate to disappoint you, but everything I know about construction, I just told you. I don't know nothing else. But here's a good thing we could do. Is there a design professional or construction professional? Melody! Matt, answer that question.
Do you want a mic?
Yeah, give him the mic, man. See, Samantha, see how I just pivoted like that? Not every moderator could work like that.
For 3D printing, you asked about? For 3D printing houses? So it's being investigated right now in like Austin, Texas is doing a bunch of it. Places where there's a lot of land. Because you need, for the printing system, a bunch of space around it to then bring in the trucks with the material and the printer to move around. Something we don't really have here in our tight little narrow lots. So not so much. But we'll ask Kirk about prefabrication modular construction. And one is there a way
You gotta hold on for a second.
I'm just going to
Play
take
too
your
much. I thought you wanted. I thought you was
While I
answering
have
that
the
woman's
mic,
question,
I'm
man.
just going to keep it. Is how can that sort of systems like CAPSIS or the next version of CAPSIS, how can they be promoted here? Like, how can we scale things like that, and how can we get the agencies to back them?
So what I would say is, and listen, there are examples of modular buildings that have gone up that weren't CAPSIS since CAPSIS closed. So people are doing it. I think the danger is that we focus on the construction technology at the expense of larger problems. And I think the fundamental problem we have in our market is the resistance to any multifamily housing in most or all of the low density communities in and outside the city. The red tape and bureaucracy around getting anything done. And so that the combination of how long it takes to get an entitlement and how long it takes to get regular projects that has a right built and the extraordinary expense of it, I think are higher up the chain in terms of problem than whether we build it conventional or modular. That's why I tend not to, nor does Nick, even though he ran the business for 20 years and dreamed about it when he was in college. He encourages people not to fall in love with the technology, but to focus on the fundamentals. And then when we do employ it, to employ it in situations where we actually realize the efficiencies of it. I mean, that's what I've heard. I mean, why am I so articulate on this one point? Because I've heard him say it like, so much, and I've seen it, So anyway, I don't want to take up too much time, but that would be my answer to that. Thanks for the answer and the question.
Good afternoon, everyone. Rachel Webster with Impact Brooklyn. Thank you all for this amazing conversation. Nadine, my question's for you. How can we make the NOAA acquisition strategy you're using in other places work here in New York City?
Good question.
Good question. I don't know that I can answer that really. I think for it to work, honestly, and it goes to what we were just talking about. It's not, that is a delivery system, right? And it's an access issue to maintain affordability and to have people be able to access that housing. So that is important for us to do in our city, and lifting up, maybe with Andy, a fund to be able to do that. But in order for that to happen, I think we know, and once again, this is no fault of any one agency or people are working. I worked in the city government for a while, so I know every day people are working really, really hard and making really hard decisions, and yet the system isn't connected, right? And so I think, I would be lying if in all of our buildings I said we had 0 vacancies. We should have 0 vacancies, but we don't. And that means it's not about supply. It's about the system. And so I think it's figuring out what are the policies, regulations, what are the processes that people are doing on a daily basis that's standard operating procedure and not like a HUD regulation. And there's a lot that actually is, well, this is just how we do things, but people don't know that because they've been doing it for so long. So really understanding like a process map, and that we've done process mapping, and it's amazing what staff do day in and day out, and their leadership might not know, like, well, wait a second, why are you doing it that way? And they're like, well, this is how we're supposed to do it. We're doing our job. And so I think it's that as well. And then I think it's the political will to go out and raise funds and maintain our affordable housing. So I don't have like a one, like, I could put,
You have a whole book here.
I have
She
a
has
whole
it right
book.
here. It's written right here.
I hope that answers your question. I would love for a fund to get lifted up in New York.
Thank you. So can we thank Nadine, Mark, and Andy, and me?